was what, if any, city, county, or state kinds of things are happening in your county that we need to be aware of? I mean, we knew about the Publix market on the down the road there. I mean, those kinds of things impact a building that's near it. If a highway is going to be continued. This time we flew into Orlando and came over on the other highway, but sometimes we've come up the Suncoast Highway that comes to an end, like no highway I've ever seen quite comes to an end. But I keep hearing that maybe that's going to happen. So are there?
That's what I keep hearing. That thing's going to go right through.
So are there?
It's supposed to go through all the way and then come up north of Crystal River on 19 and end out there.
Right.
And in fact, it goes. The intended route goes through one of our school board members, Mr. Murray. He's not here today, but
Because it goes through his
property.
He's down there with a flag going, no, not me.
The biggest thing I think that you may or may not know is that a nuclear plant is in the permitting stages in Levy County. That was kind of off the table. Chuck actually can probably attest to it a little more, but it is back on a schedule, at least for the moment. And then the other one
that
is
would affect the Levy is north, right?
Mm-hmm.
Levy is north.
So that would affect the schools on the north and potentially put some people living in
That Central Ridge area
that
again,
area
I
up
think
there,
tends
which is already
to take that.
impact.
And that's where I think the potential again of that purchase of that property falls in line with some of that.
And that was a thought on the new elementary school being built because
Exactly, yeah. And then the port, which has been a conversation, while I'm not sure that it has as much intended impact as a result of it, the port I think is being used to then help rationalize finishing the road that you were just talking about. So while the port itself may not have an impact as to even if it were to take place, it's certainly talking about trying to build more infrastructure into the county, which would potentially, I think, drive that conversation, which I think right now has been, Chuck, is that conversation mostly dead right now of that next phase of the Suncoast?
Well, my understanding is that they are looking at it, and that that's part of the reason why I recently sent the staff a questionnaire regarding the use of it and how they would use it. But my understanding is that they're resurrecting it, and it may be more possible than it was a year ago.
And is that somewhat in part, again, by trying to build that infrastructure for the port? Because that was my understanding, at least from the senator's office, that was some of that conversation, that if we're going to talk about those things, we have to have a better infrastructure for them.
Well, my understanding is it has more to do with linking the state interstate highway system and linking Tampa to Jacksonville. There's actually another phase of it that goes from Red Level or from the Citrus terminus up to Jacksonville.
Really?
That has not been really talked about, but there's another part of it. But I don't know what the status of it is really.
See, he's our brain.
And Chuck, if that highway were to be approved, is it a 5-year, is it a 10-year trajectory?
Well, it was a 5-year, 10 years ago. Now it's one of those things that
It's kind of like a country mile.
it's got to be justified, I think, and that's where it is. I think that it there has, to my knowledge, not been any right-of-way acquisition yet, and that's really the first step.
And that would take 5 years. Okay.
It's a long way out. It's a long way out before it's going to affect you.
But I think just the prospect of it, if it really did get off the ground, would have an impact on our system.
That
It sounds like
property,
the power plant is more of a.
the power plant, I think, has been a more realistic, and you add to that they've just put, which will come online here, it'll be just completed here, I think by Christmas, directly across the street from the property that we purchased in the Central Ridge area, in the Pine Ridge area, is a brand new Walmart. And so,
Walmart always generates children.
well, I mean, what happens though is that's
Just go in
just
and ask
building
for
that
some, they'll sell 'em to you.
infrastructure and the people's desire to build there or to reoccupy. You know, one of the things that really has happened during this recession is that there are a lot of vacant homes,
Sure.
but the infrastructure, the homes themselves are there. It certainly then potentially makes it more desirable to go into that location. I think that's some of the more, you know, the populace has definitely seen that as an area that they wanted. So I think the Walmart just is an indication of, I think Walmart sees those same trends.
Oh, my favorite one, just budget considerations. But what's realistic here? What's really, you know, I talked earlier about, we
We're having a
talked-
bake sale.
Yeah, have a big sale, see what we can do. We talked earlier about your numbers right now are not gonna result in the state approval of additional capacity. It's just, I mean, that's just the reality of it is. And I think it's really good on the long-range planning with Citrus Springs Middle School to know that that's planned to have another 300 capacity to it. But that's not gonna get approved here right now, not with the numbers that you have right now. So what are we looking at in terms of what's realistic that can become part of this next phase of your facility plan? Help us with that a little bit.
Realistic
Some
money.
places go out and pass and put forward a bond,
Oh, we
working
did
with
that.
a school district that,
We did that.
We just did that with Christopher High School.
Yeah.
so is there another one in the future here that?
There's our man back there.
Yes.
Well, I mean, we do have capacity, that's what you're asking, yes. It's just a matter, can we substantiate everything we need to do in our facilities and maintenance program and bring on additional debt service? So I think it just all goes to what type of master plan we put out for this east side, so to speak, and what the board has a vision for, and then assign some dollar amounts to it, and then kind of prioritize as that, how we may plan to get there, I think is what I think we should be looking at as far as.
Okay. But you have the capacity.
We do have capacity.
You have capacity to get there, okay.
But we still have an underlying, issue that affects our budget consideration too, and that is that we still haven't finished our west side.
That's right.
And we
Phase
have
three.
an empty, of the phase 3 situations, which becomes, how does that play into the budget? Does it not play into it? Or does it significantly play into it?
Elaborate. We still haven't finished the west side.
Phase 3, or the Crystal River project was broken from one phase to 2 phases to then ultimately needed to go to third phase. And we have roughly, I think from the budget numbers, we have just under $14 million would be necessary to complete it at its current design.
But we're willing to modify that design to get it finished.
But that becomes, a question of what takes place, and does anything there need to take place before the east side? And I think it's still a struggle. I think it's a struggle in all of our minds of where that fits into it.
And I don't want you to look at your staff person back there, because that was where you immediately went when we asked you about budget, but
He's the budget man.
I understand
He's the budget guy.
that,
Yeah.
but you are the voice of the people, and you have, that's why we really want to talk to you too. What is your sense of there may be financial capacity to get a bond, but is there public capacity
Yes.
for that?
I get emails and phone calls every day.
I just say, and they say, don't stop on Crystal River High School, because if you stop now, it won't be completed. Please continue phase 3.
Get this done.
Phase 3.
And this comes from the public.
From the public as a whole, not just the folks in Crystal River little area.
I think it's Crystal River, at least
It's
from the people that
Crystal
River.
contact me, it's the Crystal River.
Florida doesn't, we don't pass bond referendums like they do in other states. We are funded by the state. The state took away some of our ability to levy local millage a couple years ago. We were able to pass by supermajority to bring that money back in addition to the taxes that the state was levying. Now they just asked us to put out a referendum 2 years ago, which we passed, for capital outlay money. This this ballot will have that referendum again, but we swapped it from capital outlay money to operational because the state had underfunded our operational costs. So we really are in potential of losing that 0.25 mils, which is about $2.5 million a year from that additional levy from our referendum that we passed 2 years ago, because we're putting it into operational, and of course if it doesn't pass, we lose it anyway.
Back to November 7th.
Yeah, and then the state has again,
And that I think is part of the public's answer.
yeah.
I mean, whether there is support, that 0.25 may be our answer one way or the other.
But the other thing, again, the battle with the charter schools is they're trying to push through some legislation that will add capital outlay funding to charter schools at the expense of public schools. So again, we have an opportunity to lose more capital outlay money going forward with this race with the charter school structure. And the other thing is our capital outlay funding has been dramatically decreased over the last 3 or 4 years, maybe. What do you think, Kenny? What did we say, $20 million over the last 3 years?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, basically the cost of a school we've lost.
Because.
In your capital outlay money that comes from the
Yeah,
state.
because
Yes.
the state, obviously having,
States
budget
having
issues.
financial difficulties.
Yes.
But they also eliminated some of those funding sources that we had received money from in the past, and eliminated also some stream money specifically for class size reduction, because they saw a decrease in population of Florida, student population. We went from 60,000 new students a year to a minus. So they said, oh, you guys, your schools aren't growing, so you don't need that money anymore. That's what
you had to suck up this.
Yeah, so I think our quandary right now, and where we're probably headed to the next question is this. Because we're having budget constraints, much more so than we've ever experienced in the past, and now we have projects that we've identified that are high priorities, we really have to really take a scalpel to trying to figure out how are we going to parcel out that much smaller pot of money, use it effectively, and in the right places with the highest priority, and achieve the most bang for our buck without putting ourselves into debt for the next 20 years. Because we don't know what's going to happen in 20 years, But that's kind of what has brought us to today.
Kind of why we're here.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
Yeah, you got our attitude quickly.
You know, there's one thing too that I to just throw into the mix, because we've got everything else out there. So the issue of portables. And the issue, I guess, is I have appreciated that this board has, I think, generally taken the position that portables are not ideal classrooms for our students and for learning. And Ms. Hamill, by the way. Yeah, exactly. So I kind of did include. And we still have, Lecanto, I think through potentially the rezoning, Lecanto Highs will probably be removed is I think the direction that's going. We then have really 2 schools left, one being one of the schools that we keep talking about, and that's Floral City. Does that school necessitate those mobiles being there? And I know principals and teachers will tend to say immediately, absolutely, we need all the space we can. But I'm not sure that maybe, again, either through the rezoning or through a better planning, that we can eliminate those without necessarily replacing those. Can we utilize the existing space more efficiently between that? Because the capacity of those mobiles, of those portables, there are 4 of them out there, gentlemen?
Yes.
So 4 at 18 students a classroom is about 72 students. And if I recall, we're already under there by Floral City's capacity is 497. There's currently 367. So even if you reduced that, on paper at least, it says that we've got capacity to just remove those portables. Now that's without having conversations with administration, but I'm saying on paper, that does certainly appear to be the case. So that's a question that I wonder. And I believe we have portables out at Citrus Springs as well, although their capacity is a little farther up there. But that becomes, I think, a question of, do we want to continue to maintain those, and do we really have to expand that school or replace those? It would be an expansion, because right now we've expanded them through the use of portables. So I throw that out there because I do think that since that our numbers there continue to reduce.
We'd like to be rid of all portables, we really
Absolutely.
would.
Well, and you can move children out of portables. I mean, people fill portables because they're there, right? Work expands and fill the space allotted, same thing
Exactly.
with portables. If there's a space there, trust me, every principal will fill it. You can operate a building at 100% capacity. You can't operate a building at every classroom being used every period. It has some potential programmatic impact, especially at a middle school or high school, where you have a science lab and you're going to put an English class in there one period because you need a space for an English class. Trust me, principals shove round pegs in square holes every single day, and they'll do it if they have to. If there's a portable, they'll put it there instead, because that's not an ideal optimum learning space for an English classroom with gas nozzles and electrical things and
Showers.
lab tables and all that stuff. It's places for kids to
Hurricanes.
play. So you can decide that you're going to increase the utilization of your buildings by saying to teachers, I'm sorry, starting next year, you don't have planning in your classroom. Your planning is in the library or down the hall in the faculty room or whatever. Your room is going to be used every single period.
And in elementary, that of course sometimes becomes a little different.
It's
in
different in an elementary usually than it is at a middle school or
But
high school.
I believe those capacity numbers, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe those are what we've identified as board capacity, takes into account a percentage factor for the number of periods per day, and number it's being used, and I'm
The high
correct.
school does.
Huh?
The high school. has
Middle
it.
school.
Yeah, the high school and
is
middle
90%
school
of fish.
have a percentage factor.
Yeah.
Elementaries do not.
Right now, those numbers that we showed you,
That was my opinion.
the
So,
board,
Which would again go back to that,
You should be able to do
that
it
there
without them.
certainly could do without them.
Yeah.
Again, on paper.
My guess is, I don't wanna pick on, I know there's portables at Floral City, and I know that when you look at the numbers, Floral City has excess capacity.
Right.
I don't wanna get any principals mad at me here, I was a principal, and I'll tell you, when I was a principal, I needed everything that was there. I can
And
tell you
then
that
some.
right now.
And then
I
some.
needed some more, yeah.
Yes.
Because my job as a principal is to get everything I can for my school, so you're going to. But your point is well taken, that the fact is, you probably could house all of the students without the use of the board.
and in many cases, I think I'm remembering Floral City correctly, they are using them for specialized spaces. They're not general classrooms.
That was my
They're
understanding.
Title I spaces or they're special ed spaces. Well, number one, our goal is to get those kind of students into the regular building rather than sitting out in the middle of nowhere in a portable by themselves. But you don't want a classroom of 18 or 20 kids in a portable. You want a smaller group in there. But finding a space that's appropriate for those programs in some of those older buildings, they weren't designed for those. There aren't small instructional spaces for those programs to exist.
And
which is why
those,
you added
and
portables
again,
in
the
first
space planning of the existing facility, if we again said we were looking to not have those portables out there, and then go back to that campus and look how we can identify that space area. I know Mr. Blocker did that with the middle school this last year, with Citrus Springs Middle, and we were able to identify quite a lot of space. We're moved to portables out there, and in some cases we actually did some minor renovation, and truly took, for example, a room that was way oversized for a classroom, we were able to make it 2 classrooms.
Sure. Sure.
So I think that's something too that needs to be brought into that mix of conversation with that.
Let me get back to where
That's
we
where we
were
were.
and see if there are other, any other last budget. Right. Probably faster. Oops.
But, yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about these issues and their effect and their relationship on that district-wide capital planning efforts, because each of the things you do pulls a string someplace else. You're gonna move some kids from one place, you're gonna affect another place. You're gonna move the portables out, do you have space in the building, it's gonna push into the building, or all of those kinds of things. Any of these issues have an effect and a relationship on district-wide capital planning. And we do understand that you probably can do almost anything, you just can't do everything. And therefore, we really need to think about what are the priorities. Because those priorities that you had set on that original 2010 chart that I showed you that had the colors, those priorities are still there. You have not significantly altered that in terms of suitability. There is still a big red box on Inverness Primary. There is still a big yellow box on Floral City and on Inverness Middle School. So the question is, your priorities in 2010 were pretty clear. It sounds as though now there are some other conversations that are making you rethink those priorities and think about how to do things differently. Not just put them out a little bit farther, like that new elementary school was sort of on the books when we were here last. You were thinking it was going to be coming sooner, but now it's been pushed out a ways because of enrollment. But I mean, you have a roadmap here based on what existed in 2010. So developing new priorities, we've heard a bunch of conversations about issues, about east side, west side issues, about, I mean,
Completing the west side.
completing the west side.
That's one that I wasn't aware of before we came in here today, and completing the west side. Where does that factor into the priorities you have with the budget limitations you have? And that's really why I think we're here, right?
Well, it is, because I think some people make the assumption that that has to be a first priority, and some people don't.
Sure.
And when we look at Floral City Elementary School, our plan told us that that was a priority. But then again, we need to look at IPS, and if we look at IPS, we have to look at the schools that are connected and impacted by that, and the number of students that are served in that school versus the number of kids that are served in these other 3 schools. So it's kind of it's a juggle, because we have such less money than we had before.
If we had more money, it wouldn't be a
It
problem.
wouldn't be a problem.
Well, if you had more money, you'd be taking care of Floral City, you'd be taking care
But
of
you-
IPS, you'd be
But you
finishing Crystal
also,
River.
I mean, the bad news about having too much money is you sometimes make bad decisions.
But we wouldn't, we've got a roadmap.
Well, and that really is the issue of why you are in particular here, is that we didn't make good decisions for many, many, many years. And that's why at Crystal River High School, instead of a new science lab, they had new tennis courts. That's why some schools were in disrepair and some schools had state-of-the-art of some facilities that they probably didn't need, because there wasn't a big plan. And so we've tried to be very diligent in using, especially external people, to use your judgment and your expertise to help guide those decisions rather than the building administrator of the day, because that's what we have gotten into trouble with in the past.
And the facilities are much more aligned and have equitability amongst the things they have within them now than
Now.
probably ever.
Now, yeah,
Yeah.
but
No,
10 years ago, there wasn't.
No, yeah.
It was the squeakiest wheel that got the money. And whether the squeakiest wheel actually had the most squeak, we don't know, which is it was the loudest wheel.
That's the loudest wheel.
So what we're looking for is almost in the realm, I think, I don't know if you all agree with me, but we wanted to see a feasibility study, maybe with some specifics. When we look at these elementary school, middle school, high school, the 2 elementary schools, what can we accomplish with the limited funds we have?
Okay.
Do we need to apply a little bit at each school to fix all of them at one time? Do we need to just have a big list and just put all of our money at the first one, and then when we get more resources, we go down that list. You know, help us in trying to figure that out, and then also come up with some specific recommendations for what kinds of things you think those schools need, even when it comes to architectural features. Do we need to tear down this building? Do we need to rearrange the campus? You know, like we did at Christopher Primary, we went from the back door to the front door, all those kinds of things.
Well, high school too.
Yeah. And so we had the conversation about, okay, who would be best suited to help us in making these determinations? Do we need to go back to our old methodology, which is hiring an architectural firm to come in and bid the project? Or do we need to define the project first, rather than have the architectural firm define the project for us? And I think because of our limited funds, we've decided we need to really clearly identify those needs first before we have anybody come in and tell us how much it will cost to do it, rather than the other way around, because you do tend to get led by,
Agree with you.
yeah.
I agree with you. I mean, our architects are really, really talented people, but they have to provide solutions for the educational issues that you define,
Right.
that you and this school administration defines. Yeah. And they can provide so that they can provide very creative solutions for meeting those needs.
Right, but I think we also need to limit those needs too, rather than be, you know, Crystal River was basically a blank piece of paper. You know, and they almost redesigned an entire school. And that's probably what was necessary.
They did.
But we're not in that boat anymore.
No, you're not there.
That
Yeah,
boat
what that
left.
school was when I saw it 5 years ago, you needed to do that.
Yeah, it was a mess.
You don't have, I mean, looking at this chart, you don't have that kind of need
You don't.
left.
And you know, what's I think often happens to us is the symbiotic relationship in balancing out the schools. Looking forward, how does one affect another also in what we need to repair or renovate? And I go back to IMS then, because whether it's Citrus Springs Middle plays a factor, or for example also Crystal River Middle, which right now is at 60%, 68% utilization, a school that's designed, you know, to have a capacity of 1,200, and we've got, you know, 800 basically there. How does that play into saying, well, if we again plan on shifting all of those boundary lines, do we accomplish not having to spend the money at Inverness Middle School as we intended, because we can bring those numbers down from 1341, or right now we actually have a capacity, I mean, that we've got utilization at you know, at a little over 1,000, almost 1,100 it's fluctuated at.
Yeah.
Making it the largest school. It's almost the same size as Crystal River High School.
That's correct. That's correct. And it's back to that whole school size issue. How big do you want a school to become?
Absolutely.
You have the capacity there, but that's a different question.
Right.
If you have the capacity is different, but do you want that many students in a middle school?
And if we're going to have that capacity there, then that means we're going to have to do a lot more to renovate that school to accommodate that capacity.
That's correct.
So
That's correct.
should we look at then saying, well, listen, we have capacity elsewhere in the district that we should be balancing, as well as then we renovate what we need to
But
at a
you have
school.
to bite the bullet on middle schools because you have no state capacity, because you have plenty of space.
Right.
Right.
Which means then rebalancing.
Which is exactly what you're getting at.
Yeah.
Exactly what you're saying. What I'm hearing you say right now is that if we're gonna go through this huge pain, if we're gonna go through this and say we're gonna do it now, okay, then what's the long term? And is the long term to get more students where we only are at 60% of capacity? Is that am I
Yeah.
hearing you correct? Okay.
Because Crystal River, for example, is a community that, again, it isn't where there's growth, because it's an established community. And so it's built out there. It really is going to take us having to rezone back into that growth.
Put the middle school one up. Okay.
You know, that's what we did with Christopher Primary School. When we decided to renovate, we decreased the capacity.
So they affect less students.
Right.
Well, also it enabled us to build on the smaller site. Remember, at one point there was going to be a 2-story building and it didn't fit right, and there was a lift.
And if you can see, that's
So
the
at
middle
moment-
schools.
At the moment, you have no need to do anything here at all. All of your schools are fine, but Your point is that.
Point is.
Well,
we're not
we've had logistical issues at Inverness Middle School.
Yes, we have.
We've had everything from traffic to,
Oh, absolutely.
and so we've been, as we have struggled with that. No. So, and as you notice on that blue side there, that's one of our smaller, I mean, that's where we have the most capacity, available
That's 'cause you don't have
capacity.
any houses out in here.
Absolutely.
I don't know why you don't have any houses out in here.
Got an idea for that, but yeah, and the issue with Inverness, the issue with Inverness Middle is the one that you have some issues. You're not over capacity in the building, I agree, but you've got some issues
Yes.
just around the sites, around all of that, and how big that school has become, okay? There, the little bit of saying that over here at Crystal River, we've got this capacity. This is like double acute pain, because you're into domino effect.
Yeah.
You're into moving kids from here to here to here to
Mhm.
make that kind of a solution work. And districts often shy away from that.
And often, I mean, I know in this district, you don't have a clear pattern of where do elementary kids go, therefore where do middle school kids go, therefore where do high school kids go. I mean, obviously, a kid who lives right there is probably gonna go to
All
Crystal
three,
River
all three right there.
middle school, elementary school, and high school, but if a kid lives there, there may be a difference. But if you're going to go through your acute pain when you finish Crystal River High School and decide you have to do something different with Lecanto that's overcrowded, then to change high school attendance boundaries gives you an opportunity to think about aligning those,
Well,
so you don't have a kid who goes one direction one year
and I believe that, Chuck, that's that process for us for the high school, we're starting in December.
Well, we look at it every year. We're required to, the board's required to adopt attendance boundaries every year. So we started 3 months early this year, so it should be done earlier. And specifically, we're looking at the high school and the elementary schools. The middle schools are all well under capacity. I think that the main issue with Inverness Middle School, we have, as you know, looked at, redesigning some of the parking and addressed some of the stacking issues and so forth. And we're also working with FDOT and the city of Inverness to try to find out if there's a way to realign our entrance so that we can have a traffic signal. And that would solve a big part of the problem with suitability, or not with suitability, but with traffic there. And the Publix may not have any impact initially, but when the old Publix has a new thing in it, the traffic in that area is going to go up quite a bit, probably about 15%. So the problem's not going to get better. And like I said, when we were talking about that, it's not what's happening at the school as much as what's happening around the school that's causing the problem at Inverness Middle School. It's not the fact that we're generating more traffic. It's the fact that there's more traffic in the area that's growing in that.
But you say that, and I understand about the middle school, that's not being looked at because we're under capacity, but at the same time, we've got Crystal River Middle that is trending every year smaller and smaller as far as the number of students attending there, because we have nothing to drive growth there. So should we be pulling that into the mix and saying that, since we're going to be doing the other two, should we bite the bullet and take that one on as well, instead of putting it off another year?
acute pain, remember?
Yeah.
You were the one who said you wanted acute pain.
No, I didn't say I wanted it, I said that's what we have.
I mean, the report will look at it. The report will have all the schools and their projected enrollment, their current utilization, their projected utilization, and the board can certainly throw that in the mix and we can look at that. But I mean, we're going to give you a priority list, a list of things that, and what we think is the highest priority and why, and that probably wouldn't be at the top of the list. But the Floral City will probably be in the mix, and then Mr. Blocker had been concerned about the enrollment at Homosassa going down, and we looked at that, and it is coming back up a little bit, so it probably won't be in the mix this time. But every year we'll look at it and we'll give you the ones that we think are the highest priority to address in the order that we think is best. And the high schools, probably Crystal River High School, will be in the mix to address the fact that we now have an entrance on Turkey Oak. We'll cut down on the travel time for students who live in the northern end of the county. Now it will be closer for them to travel to Crystal River than previously they traveled to Lecanto. So that could certainly come into play there, because that's the main issue that we look at is the travel time.
So if that happens, if that's going through this one-time thing, if that happens and you're gonna move some students from somewhere up in here that are now Lecanto over to Crystal River, that's what seems logical. When I just look at this from outside, that's what seems, you're probably gonna move some of those students, okay? Wouldn't you at the same time then, and here's the domino theory, wouldn't you at the same time then move those same students that are going to high school at Crystal River to middle school at Crystal River?
It would seem logical.
It would seem logical, and then that would take some students away from Citrus Springs. So then wouldn't you at the same time, the domino theory, move some of these students from
From the IMS to the
up
Citrus Springs, and it's, again, it would seem logical.
Wouldn't that seem like a logical kind of a progression? And your reason for doing it is the new Crystal River High School, and the new access to it, and all of that happening at this time. It seems to me, just from an outside looking at this like that, like I wouldn't do domino this way, I would do it this way.
Mhm.
Certainly look at that.
And sometimes people have got their hearts set on, they bought a house, they're headed for X, right? And depending on transportation, some districts grandfather in, and if you're gonna be a senior and headed for someplace that you get to stay,
We
for
do
all the
that.
freshmen.
We have a
Yeah.
sibling
So-
guideline
So
too.
you may have, an
Yeah.
opportunity to do that. That's kind of the chronic.
But, I go back to what Ms. Deutschman has said over and over, and that is that generally speaking, though, our schools, geoeconomically, they are pretty much balanced and nearly the same. There is not
Yeah, but if
huge
you play on a
differences.
football team at school-
No, I understand those, but I'm talking about as far as
Program.
whether that is necessarily accurate I think it's again perception, as opposed to, for example, in Hillsborough County, where you'll have a brand new school that's serviced by a very elite district, and then you have another school that's serviced by a more, inner city type of thing. We don't have that.
You don't have that with, let me just throw this out as what I think the one exception to that
Yeah.
might be, okay? And again, you're here, I'm not, I'm just looking at it from afar. Well, the one exception, I agree with that. You don't have that kind of this community belongs here kind of thing. With maybe the exception of like a community like Floral City, okay? Community like Floral City, I could see early, I heard someone say that those communities, that school is the focal point of their community. And they see themselves,
Yes,
it's
it
probably
is.
true of Homosassa. They
Yes.
see that as, this is my town, this is my school. Okay?
Mhm.
And the people that aren't there, this is to take into consideration, this is what I usually find in places all over the country, the people that are there are that's their town, their community, okay? And they believe in it, and good, that's a healthy attitude, okay? But the people that aren't there, when you start talking about moving them in, that isn't their town at all. Everything to me is inverse, everything, you're gonna move me down into this, so I think that with the one exception to what you're saying,
Yeah.
is that small school, small community issue that you may have.
And I think we always try to look at that too, that's very important. It's a
It is.
cultural thing about the school.
Sure.
And if you buy a house to live in a community where your children are going to school, I think we have an obligation to look at what your wants and desires are, and not just to look at numbers and shift people just because the pen goes better than the map over here.
Or to do it so often that people never develop any kind of allegiance. I mean, there are places where they're on the dividing line, and one year kids are going here, and the next year the kids are going there, and they begin to feel like, I really don't have any connection.
And I think like Chuck was saying, if you're going to make some sort of change, it has to be a a prolonged change, it cannot be a year change or
Right.
a 2-year change. You have to have a vision of what's gonna come in the future, but we really want to consider the culture of the school and the allegiance of the people, because that is very important. You don't shift people, one day work at Citrus schools, next day go to Brevard. You don't do that, because no one can ever have ownership, and we want our people to have ownership in the school and pride.
And it builds that, I know, you know, and that's a big deal to, you know, I'm way past the age of having little kids, but I still remember the days when I did. You know, and if I had bought a house in a place and I thought that my kids are going to this elementary and then this middle and this high, that's important to me. And I get pride in that and I get ownership.
But I didn't hear the emphasis on feeder patterns. If we could help you line up so that if you lived here, you would, every kid in that neighborhood would go to a middle school.
We do
and
have
high
feeder
school
patterns.
town.
Yeah, our feeder
Is
patterns
there
are always considered. When we rezone the high school, we look at the elementary and middle
Okay.
pattern.
Okay,
We have very few schools where the students would be split going to 2 different schools from elementary to middle or middle to high, because we have an odd number of middles. We have 4 middle schools and 3 high schools. So
The biggest place where I've seen, and when I just studied this to prepare for this meeting today, the biggest place seemed to me like
Yeah, it's
the
out
kids
there.
from Citrus Springs Middle really get divided between
Yes, they
Lecanto and Citrus High School. That seemed like the biggest divide of that feeder pattern. And there's nothing, you've got 4 middle schools and 3 high schools, you're gonna have that.
We don't get a lot of complaints. We get a lot of complaints when we move.
yeah.
Yeah.
We're
That's a
already
good point,
getting
that's a good point,
complaints.
yeah, okay.
So then, there does seem to be that. So in 2010, the priorities were pretty clear. 2012, the priorities have been muddied by the reduced dollar amount available.
Economics.
And growth patterns change.
So if I,
And
if
the other
I,
big issue that I hear, and I don't wanna lose sight of this, is that, is it a higher priority to finish what we started, or to move to
Yeah.
what the next priority is?
Sure.
okay, so I was
I
gonna,
think so.
ask if I could put you on the spot and it's okay to pass. What is each of yours highest priority? Finishing what you started?
I don't know if we could do that. It's considered a poll.
I think it's been a tough balance, but I mean, for,
I don't want, I wanna,
Yeah,
I wanna.
and I don't wanna, you, that's a good
That's why I
point.
give
We
you
don't
a
wanna
pass.
get you into any kind of a thing where you're making any commitments, this is a.
It's
this is a
discussion,
workshop.
They're not
This is a
voting.
discussion.
Yeah.
This is a discussion.
You know, we've already invested 50, 70, I don't know how many $1 million at Christopher High School. It would be nice to finish it now, but what we're saying is then kids at IPS will have to suffer another 5, 10 years. And that's not fair. They don't have the same quality facilities that are present at Christopher High School. Now, Christopher High School doesn't have 100%, same level of high quality, but they have 90%. And the majority of their students, the shift is gonna be the gym going to ROTC or something. It doesn't impact as many students. What we're talking about, IPS, IMS, et cetera, impacts all of those students. And that student population between those 3 schools is 4,500 students, 4,000 students. My math wrong, 1,700, 1,200?
16, 22, probably 33.
Okay. And then we look at Floral City Elementary School that impacts 400 students for the same dollar. So I think we have to look at the needs and also the number of students that are impacted by those improvements of facilities and equity in facilities. That's
So
my
the
opinion.
equity really does affect you.
Yes.
Thank you.
and you know, Crystal River, we keep referring to it as phase 3, but in much of what we've been discussing, because we've modified what was phase 3, that it can be broken up into projects potentially too. It doesn't necessarily, if you were doing a feasibility study today, readjusting everything, I would think that Crystal River would have very few, I think you'd be probably in the green only because of the gymnasium, but it wouldn't be into the yellow and red that we have the other schools. And so if we were having a priority of critical needs, I would think that what still would stick out is IPS.
And IMS.
And IMS. Now, that doesn't mean that it's not on our list of priorities, that it just may be that that's a project as opposed to a full-out phase, the way we've kind of envisioned it now. Because really, the bulk of the campus is done, with the exception of, we could be renovating the 900 building, either ongoing or as a project. The gymnasium could be done as a project, and maybe now it's that we're keeping the locker rooms and some of those other pieces and just replacing the gym. So, those could become projects as opposed to a full-out phase. So,
I'm from Crystal River, so I'll just keep my mouth shut, okay?
It's okay. It's okay. You said you could pass.
With me, it's having a plan, whatever it is, having a plan and sticking to the plan, and if the decision is made to continue with Crystal River, then go ahead and do it, or if it's with the other, but whatever we say we're gonna do to do it. Because a person wrote me an email saying that, well, if you don't finish now, it won't get finished. We don't want that to happen. We want something in a plan that says we will finish in 3 years or 2 years or 1 year.
And do you have a sense that the voters and the community will feel
November
that there
7th.
was?
We're gonna know on November 7th.
I mean, that's $2.5 million to us a year.
Right.
Right now, in our, I believe, and Mr. Blocker, correct me, I think we have potentially by next year $5 million, set aside for Crystal River High School.
Yeah, it's like 3 or 4 years out, but we plugged in $5 million.
But even if we
And that
wanted to
would
do a
finish phase
project,
No,
no,
Well, is it
That's not-
12 or 15?
that's about a third of the way there.
15. Yeah, I was thinking it was 12 or
Yeah.
15.
Be able to
That's
do
what I was
all of
thinking.
phase 3. We're
So,
talking about
so it's not even like if we said, let's go with it, there is that money
It's
that's
still gonna be
there.
10 years.
It's still our ways to be able to say, let's go.
Right.
That's-
And Crystal River was in such bad shape for so long that the people over there just want to be done with it. They want it finished. But we've got Inverness Primary School and Inverness Middle, and I care about those schools too.
Sure you do. Sure. That's part of being important.
It would be nice to say again, what is our critical needs? And that's where we have to utilize our monies.
And I've got a grandson that plays basketball.
No, and I agree with that. I agree, but I think that we just don't have the, it's hard to say to somebody like Crystal River, to say to Inverness Primary, you need to continue to be teaching in a classroom that has no windows and getting there by going through another classroom to get in there. And that's what I see when I go there and I see this red spot there and I'm going, boy, that's a real critical issue that we need to, unfortunately, money is the only thing that's going to probably correct those issues for us.
And that's a good point. It's drilling down to find out what exactly the issue is. Like you said, going through one classroom to get to another. Knowing that puts a different way of looking at things.
The other key to it, having a master plan, and Crystal River High School has a master plan that includes the renovation of the gym. So it's not like we don't know eventually where we're going. We know what the finished product looks like. That was our mistake on Inverness Middle School. The renovation was a partial renovation, and I don't think it was a full, I may be wrong about that, but I don't remember a master plan being developed for the entire campus.
I wasn't on the board
Forward in
then.
the future. Well, I was a parent at the time, and we went through it was a very horrible time because we had a board member that wanted to replace the school, there wasn't enough money, and there wasn't support for that. It became a very contentious issue. So any discussion about renovations at the time, we're always in the middle of this embroiled fight.
Sure.
And we don't buy it. We don't.
But it was, I think it was a lack of planning for the future to complete that project, and that's why Inverness Middle School kind of came to a standstill. The only thing they changed was the paint color, right? And they've been arguing about that for the last 10 years.
Really?
The good news is that as we think about your district, you don't have the plethora of safety or those kinds of pressing issues. You have done a tremendous job of keeping up on the maintenance and the repair kinds of things. So
And
you
security
really
issues.
you really have.
And for any voters
opportunity.
listening, that's because we had a .25 for the last couple of years. We could continue to do that, which would be in the ad valorem taxpayers' best interest if we could continue that.
It is a rare school district that has done what you have done in terms of your long-range maintenance program, keeping your buildings up, keeping them repaired. As we walked around the buildings with Mike when we were here in 2010, the minute anything was found, my gosh, he was on the walkie-talkie and had his guys lined up to come in and look at this or whatever it was, especially if it was a safety issue.
It's the same, I mean,
So
it really is still that
priority-wise,
same priority.
you have the luxury of saying, we don't have to worry about any emergency or safety issues or places where we are in big trouble. You have the luxury of saying, we think it would be better, it would have a greater impact on the most children, is a reason to move your priority over here. It has the most impact on the children in the greatest need. If that's a priority, then you get special ed out of trailers and portables. And you find a space for them in the building, either by building permanent space. So, and those are two trade-offs on the west,
Mhm.
Well,
the
we
east
have
side of the
had
county,
community
even right
support,
here.
because when we wanted to put it on the ballot, it was 2 years ago,
Mhm.
the county commissioner said, oh no, we're never gonna vote for this. He was voted out of office and they overwhelmingly supported our schools.
There you go.
You got a lot of good things happening. A lot of good things. So,
We've got community support.
Where would you like us to go from here? What more do you need from us to
I
give to
think-
you?
I feel like we have a direction. That's my understanding that what our purpose was here was to have this discussion with you here this morning. And then we're gonna, Susan and I are gonna sit down and say, you know, here's what makes sense to us, looking at this as your consultants, here's what makes some sense as recommendations for how we think you should go from here. But we're gonna take some time this afternoon to do that, and we're meeting in the morning with district staff, am I correct on this? And we'll.
And I'll be there as well.
Yeah, good.
And you're gonna go to Chris River this
I
afternoon?
am.
Awesome. You're
I
gonna
am
love
at
it.
Chris River this
Both of
afternoon.
those, great.
You will love it.
Yeah, and we'll come back and kind of have that all outlined this afternoon and then bring that back and discuss it in the morning. I think I've got a good feel for where you are. I think this has been a very good discussion.
I think the pictures tell the story, but being there in those classrooms.
Oh, yeah, there's no
awesome.
question, there's no question.
Mr. Block, I want to ask you too, do you feel like you have a direction set from the board and through the discussions
I
you?
think I've heard a couple of things. One, we want to look at portables.
Yes.
And trying to find room in the actual infrastructure of the building and get rid of portables. I think we need to set a priority, it sounds like maybe based on the most impact on students as opposed to location. When they come up with a plan and kind of prioritize it in that direction, maybe that we'll put some dollar amounts to it. I think ultimately we have to do that, but then for y'all to decide which direction to go. But I think having a
You try to
master
create
plan
a
in my
couple of
mind is like a
scenarios.
budget.
That,
Mhm.
When you create a budget, it's a road, it's a path on where where you're going, and without a master plan, you don't know where you're going.
And with all the needs included, just at a different time.
phases,
Yeah.
again.
Phase, right?
Yeah.
And this has been very enlightening, any other comments?
Thank you for letting me put you on the spot.
I want to make a comment. We do these kind of workshops with lots of school boards. You all represent different areas. And I just want to really applaud you because what I'm seeing is a genuine concern from each area of the county to solve the problems of the county as a whole. And we don't always see that with school boards. We don't always see that. So I really applaud you for being able to have a discussion like this, because some school boards just can't.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for letting me be here.
Board, would you
And
like?
where's Joe?
Joe is working hard. But he's in Washington State today.
Oh,
He is in Washington State.
it's cold up there
It's,
and raining.
It's raining, but I gotta tell you, because I mean, I live in Olympia, Washington, and I gotta tell you, we set a record. We went all of July, all of
I was
August.
there at the end of July, at the end of
No-
August and
no- We
September.
had no rain.
No
All
rain.
of July.
How many
all of
days was it?
August.
40?
Yeah,
And
we
all
went-
of September.
And most of September, we went with, actually, it wasn't July, excuse me, we went all of August, the last part of July, all of August, and all of September with no rain. Set a record. And Michelle, my wife Michelle and I we were sitting at dinner a couple weeks ago, saying, when is it gonna start raining? I miss it.
I carried my umbrella and I
And you
never
never needed
opened
it.
it.
You never needed
I
it. No,
never-
it was
The
just
place I would
amazing
use
for
my
us.
umbrella is
Never happens,
Florida.
and I, you know,
Oh
us
my
people,
gosh.
It's been like.
you know, we all have webs between our toes, you know.
I know.
We
We
just-
live in a lake, and my husband said the lake went down, he says, you know what, in 30 years, it's the first time I've ever said it, oh, it's a good thing the lake went down. So, the rate's been misplaced.
Thank you
Okay.
very much.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
We look
Appreciate
forward
you
to
inviting
next
us.
week.
We'll be back in the morning with some, what we can do. Okay.
Thank you.
But then, well, you're telling the district staff that then when we receive that information, whenever they tell us,
Yes, I need to pass that on to the
okay.
district staff.
What's that?
For that, the question was, if we're gonna have that meeting tomorrow, when will it get to the board?
November 13th.
Yeah, we can certainly give you an update as to what we talked about in our discussions. I think tomorrow morning now we want to take what we've learned today and kind of formulate a plan on
Okay.
where we want to go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Right.
Thanks so much for
Thank you.
inviting us.
Thank you.
We Really
Appreciate it.
got to renew some acquaintances. So I love hearing this. I love
Where
to
are you
hear.
guys headed next?
Love to hear
I
what
get to
you're
go to
doing.
West Virginia now.
Oh, nice.
She goes to
Speak
West
to the school
Virginia.
board's convention in West Virginia.
Ah, I
I'm
should be
actually
going
going,
there.
I'm going back
Yes, you should.
Thursday. I'm here tomorrow, and I'm going back Thursday to Washington State, and then next week I'm in California. I'm
Okay.
staying in the Pacific time zone next week.
Really? South, north?
That's, the middle, Sacramento.
Are you having success in California?
We are having some success. As a matter of
That's a
fact,
different.
we are having
We'll
some
carry that
success in
over.
California. There's a lot of,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
there are some things going on. Yeah, that's right.
Mr. Dixon?
I'll be brief. I always try.
Right.
I have just a few items for you today, board members and superintendent. The first one is policy 7.33, petty cash funds, change funds. The only change to this is to a citation that has been stricken, a new citation, and the insertion of the word department instead of division. And this is pursuant to a change in the law in Florida statutes.
So just a minor change.
Yes, ma'am.
Do we have a motion?
I don't think we can, it's just.
Oh, I'm
words.
sorry, I do that every time, y'all.
We
Please
cannot vote,
excuse me,
okay?
please
Cannot
excuse
vote.
me. You're right, I just finished saying that too.
Yeah, you did.
Okay, thank you.
The next one is policy 6.18, contracts, instructional, administrative personnel. Again, this is a change in due to a change in state law, and it strikes out the language and annual or professional services, the first 97 working days and so on, and just adds a probationary contract for 1 school year shall be awarded upon initial employment in the district, regardless of previous employment in the district, in another district, or in another state. And again, this is a result of the change in the law. It doesn't,
This is part of the Student Success Act, Wes, is that correct? Or this statute, this is part of that statute where basically it makes them an at-will employee for the first year?
Well, for a year, if you're hiring for a certain day, year, whatever, it's one contract. Period.
And at the end of that year, if you don't want to have that person back, you just don't hire them. Non-renewed, okay?
But after the first year,
You don't have to give any reason.
you can't fire them in the middle of the year.
Correct.
But during the first year, you can fire the at-will.
Yeah, remember the old 97-day rule?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Walker.
This now is just like
Yeah.
10 months for the first year.
And so like at the end of 8 months, if you've had it, you just can say,
Correct, in their first year,
yes,
in their first year.
all right,
That was changed in the statute, I think, 2 years ago. Correct.
cool.
Thank you.
Moving to the next one.
yes, ma'am. The next one is policy 2.70, prohibiting discrimination, including sexual and other forms of harassment. This one is being changed or modified in accordance with a stipulated settlement agreement, I believe, in a court case that we had. When,
Why don't you let Mr. Bradshaw explain?
yeah.
We had an issue that was involving, an app. We had an issue that was involving someone who had applied at multiple schools and did not get a job. And they said it was based upon a disability, and they were discriminated against because of the disability. The Department of Justice got involved, and we reached a resolution with the Department of Justice, and one of the things was to add a little stronger anti-discrimination language into our policy, and that's where this is coming from. They looked at our policy and said, we'd like you to make these modifications, which I didn't have an objection to, so.
All right, wait a second, but why are we calling the person the victim? Do they have to be a victim?
I guess they would have to be the victim of discrimination. You know, if you have a better word, I guess that's why we workshop it.
Well, I was gonna say, instead of, could it be individual? Deprives the individual of the opportunity?
Because you're assuming guilt here by calling them a victim.
And I don't have a problem with that as long as it's consistent throughout we don't have somewhere else, and if so, we need to make that.
Because elsewhere, like in B3, it says individual's education,
Yeah,
and
we
you
can
know,
change that.
individuals, I think individual's probably what we've been using.
No problem.
This is just a curiosity question. When it says just,
That may need to say an individual.
Yeah. And page 4 or 5, it says same thing, victim.
Yeah, we'll make those.
We'll change that.
well, I wanted to ask you,
Where
if
the-
disability includes mental.
You know, I would imagine at some point in time it would, Ms. Powers, I can't tell you that off the top of my head exactly if it includes what level of mental disability.
And that's a question what level, yes.
Okay.
Would you
Yes, ma'am.
research that?
Yes, ma'am.
But
Page 4 and 5, excuse me, you have to use the word victim
Yeah,
because of the grammatical way it's written.
Right.
And that is fine, but this is
Right.
a little different. I'm sorry.
right, no, I was just gonna say that if they refer to a disability, isn't that fall under whatever the ADA is? So, you're right. So that I would think would.
I will look that up though for Ms. Powers.
Okay.
And that is a real question that came up one time, so I need
Yes,
a
ma'am.
real answer to it, so that's why I'm asking.
I'll give you a
Give me a
real
real
one. I'll give you a real one, not a fake.
As opposed to those imaginary ones.
As opposed just to attachment, I mean, it's a clarification, I should say.
The language itself came from EMCS. We asked them to give us suggestions on language that could be added, and this was what they recommended. Anything else on that one? Okay. Moving on to the last one. The last one is a new policy.
Wait just a second, one thing I meant to ask on page 3, on number 3, under 4, which one are you putting in there? Affects otherwise adversely affects, it should be A. Should be A
Oh,
fact.
they're both crossed out.
That's what, yeah, I can't see what it is. What is it supposed to be?
Where you have Ms. Powers?
It says,
Page
yeah, it looks
3,
like it's crossed out to B and E.
It's
number 3.
Oh, maybe the E isn't crossed out, it's just a line in the middle.
Yeah, that's the letter of the.
It's physically, it's visually an optical illusion.
Yeah, but it's supposed to be an A, whatever it is, otherwise that's a verb, affects. Not effects is the noun,
Really?
yeah.
I don't know how to make the difference.
A is verb, E is noun.
But I mean, in its use.
So what about the other two?
The effects of something, would that be the noun?
That's,
version?
yeah, that's the noun, but this says adversely
It affects
affects.
somebody else, it
That's the
affects
verb.
you.
No.
Hey, Alan.
No,
Look it up, Chuck. I don't want to get into English discussion here.
I would trust,
Google the grammar lady.
I would trust Ms. Powers.
I've always wondered.
It's
Everybody
supposed to be
wonders
that.
that.
Used to be an A.
Yeah.
Okay.
Change it back.
We'll change it back. Or we won't have to change it because it's a pretty name.
That's why my daughter majored in English.
I thought all attorneys did, don't use those words.
Madam Secretary.
That's what I was
Exactly.
thinking, I hired them instead.
A wonderful paralegal that knows grammar.
I take this as an insult.
Now, this next one is a new policy that was asked for by WTI for policy 5.75, verification of high school diploma for admission to Withlacoochee Technical Institute post-secondary programs. So again, this only applies to post-secondary programs and only to WTI. And this is necessary in order to have a policy to qualify for financial aid. So the federal financial aid requires it.
There they
There they
are,
are.
WTI.
WTI.
Right on cue.
Right on cue.
Did you come to say, address the policy?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Well, you're just in time.
Chuck, you wanna tell them what you've already said?
Yes, I just explained to them that it's a new policy in order to satisfy the requirement for federal financial aid.
Yes. And I've got Mary Nell Stokes with me, my financial aid specialist, and Ryan Noggle, a guidance counselor at WTI. And we're asking, this is a proactive approach to something that is coming down during the 13-14 award year. That this will be a verification item that students must verify that they have a high school diploma or its equivalent or completion from homeschool. So we are complying with information from the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators. Ms. Stokes, do you want to elaborate on anything that we have, or?
Just to know if they need clarification on anything.
Yeah.
What did you do before you had this policy?
Well, we just asked if they had a high school diploma.
Oh, you didn't make them.
Okay, it was a self-certifying item. When they filled out their financial aid packaging worksheet, they were self-certifying that it was true and correct and punishable if they had falsified any information. But it wasn't a verifiable item at that time because students can attend WTI and take programs that do not have a high school diploma. So we had not been requiring those at this time. But we will need them starting next school year for anybody who's going to receive financial aid.
Okay.
And actually, we're going to be looking at, because we need to be in the practice of requesting this. So we're starting in January, requiring that the proof be brought in. And we know we can verify our Citrus County students by looking in Skyward, and
Right.
because they have transferred it.
How do you verify another student from out of state, for instance?
They'll have to bring the proof to us.
Even if they make up a phony diploma, can you
Well-
track it back? Can you call the school district? Were you going to do that?
That is part of what this is because they are trying to get away from these diploma mills. And it's to be checking to make sure that it is a legitimate diploma. And that's why we have criteria as to what the accreditation will have to be from in order for us to accept it. And if they're not on that list, then we will not accept it.
It's going to be tough, but it's a requirement.
But if they're not receiving financial aid and they just want to be admitted, then is there a loophole for those folks?
Yeah, but we have about 90-something% of our students that are financial aid, for the programs that qualify for financial aid.
Just for verification too, where does most of that aid come from?
From Pell,
From Pell?
Title IV.
Okay.
Thanks very much. Mr. Dixon, anything else you wish to add?
No, ma'am, that concludes the policy change.
Did y'all time us? Did we make good?
Perfect.
You're perfect.
Perfect. You have an A.
Ronnie, you want to say?
Right, none of that.
Okay, quickly, just before we adjourn,
Thank y'all.
just wanted to mention, about the Thursday night with the art scholarship gathering down at the courthouse. And I have tickets if you want. Thursday night, the 1st of November, 5:30 to 7:30, and that'll be what we call a benefit event. $25 per ticket, and it all goes to the art students for scholarships, so that's why I mentioned it. And then on Saturday and Sunday, the 3rd and the 4th, will be the Festival of the Arts, which have all of the students in the schools, in the art class, not all students art classes, but all schools and the students who want to display their work will be involved at the Festival of the Arts. And we have 3 judges coming in from Gainesville, from the University of Florida, who judge the high school students, and they do a critique. They don't just, say good, better, best. They do a critique of the items they choose and will decide. And that'll be happening on the Saturday and Sunday, 3rd and 4th. So.
I have a question. Do we have anybody going to Upward Bound on Thursday?
I was gonna go be there.
Good. I was gonna go, but I have a conflict.
I'm there.
And I was gonna go and I had a conflict.
Okay.
Oh.
I'm there.
And ditto, so. And also,
Right.
I wanted to mention that Mr. Murray is now, Ms. Verderini, tell me again what center he's in. The,
Diamond Ridge
Diamond Ridge.
Rehabilitation Center in LaCanton.
Okay, and he says it's fine to visit now, just give a ring. He has the exercises, rehabilitation exercises for the student knee operation. And,
Did he have both knees operated
both
on?
knees,
Oh my
both
goodness.
knees, right. Anyone else have anything to say? Because I want to share that information with you. Anyone else have anything to say?
Just that I wanted to share, in a way. I was gonna share you a picture, if you hadn't seen, of, this is Crystal Rivers New Media Center. And that's taken from the balcony, on there, so it's amazing. It just looks amazing.
It worked hard. It worked hard.
There it is, it's on your screen.
Is it open?
No, it's
Oh, no,
it's getting there.
It opened next month, I
Next
think.
month, yeah, and then we'll be taking away the last portable that houses the current temporary media center to finish the ground, so we're getting very, very close to completing the project.
I want to remind everybody, next Tuesday at 6 o'clock is the advisory council training. Hopefully y'all will be able to come.
I'm planning on being there.
Education Foundation.
And where is it?
At, in LaCanto at the IRC or TRC or whatever it's called these days.
TRC.
Hey.
The INLC.
I heard
If there's nothing else, then we, did you have something, Mr. Ball?
No, ma'am, I was just turning this
Okay.
off, but I do appreciate the good conversation with MGT. We hope to bring back some good ideas to you.
And we stand adjourned.